For over a century, the remnants of the human race have lived in a state of precarious captivity. Behind 3 towering stone barricades, survivors wait for the inevitable moment the gates fail and the creatures roaming the wasteland rush in. We assume these fortifications exist to keep a nightmare away from society. But look closer at how the people inside treat each other, and you have to ask whether the walls were built to lock the real monsters in. This genre operates through a visible hierarchy of horror. What begins as a fight for life plunges into the darker complexities of human nature. At this first level, the objective is simple survival. We watch characters fight against hordes of mindless zombies or flesh-eating giants. Outrunning a predator requires stamina, but it is a straightforward problem. As these stories reveal, outliving a physical threat is a distraction from the deeper internal collapse. Shows like High School of the Dead and Cabaneri of the Iron Fortress establish this baseline. Within a handful of episodes, the immediate panic of a plague gives way to a deadlier problem: uninfected humans. When the courts, the police, and the social contract evaporate, society defaults to a brutal hierarchy. Those holding the weapons dictate who eats, who starves, and who serves as bait. The undead cease to be the primary villains. They function as an environmental hazard, a pressure cooker that rapidly boils away human empathy. Navigating that initial collapse means you have successfully cleared the surface, but surviving long enough to join a functioning society drags you down into a much colder tier of the struggle. Beneath the waterline, physical survival is secured, but it requires paying a sickening moral tax to the institutions providing the safety. In Seraph of the End, the remnants of the human militaryment construct Seixans. To maintain power and fight back against vampires, the authorities treat orphaned human children as livestock for their war machine. The officers conduct lethal experiments on their own young recruits to weaponize demonic powers. They secure a tactical advantage, but the cost is the very humanity they claim to be protecting. Heavenly Delusion examines this same layer through psychological dread. Children raised in an isolated, walled academy are shielded from the wasteland, yet they are subjected to biological harvesting by the adults they trust. Out in the wasteland, a survivor named Kiriko grapples with a different violation of self, discovering their brain has been surgically transplanted into their sister's body. In this environment, personal identity and morality are luxuries. The saviors sitting on the throne become mirrors of the creatures howling at the gates. Sinking into the final, most lightless layer, we leave isolated survivor camps behind to witness the wreckage of a sprawling geopolitical tragedy. In Attack on Titan, Eren Yeager starts as a victim desperate to win freedom for his walled city. Over a decade, he evolves into the architect of a global genocide. The narrative pulls the camera back to reveal that the monsters eating his people were actually an oppressed ethnic minority, weaponized by an empire. The island's suffering was a manufactured crisis, engineered through systemic indoctrination. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre argued that human beings only truly conceptualize what it means to be free when trapped under an extreme oppressive crisis. But the philosopher Baruch Spinoza countered that sensation with the concept of determinism. Because every action is part of an unbroken chain of cause and effect, the feeling of free will is merely an illusion. Eren Yeager is trapped within a temporal paradox. To protect his home from a world of hatred, he triggers a global catastrophe, becoming the very instrument of horror he vowed to destroy. Ultimately, these stories are sociological stress tests of our species. The mindless giants, the parasitic man-eaters, and the vampires are merely external manifestations of a primitive human drive for violence and retribution. Even after a world-ending sacrifice is made to end the conflict, the epilogue of Attack on Titan shows humanity eventually bombing its own rebuilt civilization back to the Stone Age. The ash settles, and a new child wanders into the ruins, approaching a familiar mystical tree. The cycle of trauma is preparing to reset once again. We consume these stories to confront what happens when the rules of society vanish. The monsters we are so desperate to keep outside the walls are already waiting for us in the mirror.